Okay, let's get started. First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second athlete town hall presentation. We started last week and we had a great presentation with a panel of some athletes who are in the U.S. university system. And following on that one, we thought we'd bring in a presentation from Streamline Athletes, who is a partner we've been working with. Streamline Athletes is the only online sports recruiting platform that focuses specifically on track and field and cross country. They understand that runners, jumpers, and throwers have different needs than quarterbacks. Finding college opportunities and choosing where to go to school can be one of the most challenging periods in the lives of athletes and their families. Streamline Athletes make the journey easier by giving you the info you need to find your best fit. Presenting today is Alison Williams, the partnerships lead for Streamline Athletes. Alison is from White Rock, BC, and was a multi-sport athlete up until university. She was recruited to run track and field and cross country at the University of Texas, Arlington, an NCAA Division I program near Dallas, Texas. After her time as a collegiate student athlete, she took on a director of operations role.
You have to do it within the.
She took on a director of operations role with the program and did some middle distance coaching and recruiting for several years. For the past year, she has been working with Streamline Athletes to make recruitment simpler for athletes and for coaches. Some of you may also know her very famous parents, Lynn Kanuka and Paul Williams. I was on the Olympic team with them in 1988, so I can say they're good friends of mine as well. And so we're happy to have that connection as well. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. You can type questions into the chat, which I will monitor, and I can also ask them as well. So if you don't want to ask a question at the end, you can also type in the chat, and I will ask it for you. So without further ado, please welcome Alison Williams, the partnership lead for Streamline Athletes. And Alison will be presenting and discussing the university opportunities from our Ontario athletes and Canadian US recruiting perspective. So over to you, Alison.
Thanks, Paul. And a big thanks. Hello to everybody, and a big thanks to Paul and Emily and the entire Athletics Ontario team for hosting this session and putting together these town hall meetings in general. It's such a cool opportunity amidst a bit of a crazy time to be able to connect with one another across provinces and across the country as a whole. So I'm really glad to be speaking with you all today. One thing, I do have some slides that might help summarize some of the things we're going to be talking about, but I can't seem to share my screen. Paul, as the host, you might need to enable me to be able to share my screen with everybody. You're muted, just so you know.
Okay, try again, Alison.
There we go. Can everybody see what's up there? Cool, awesome. Okay, so yeah, like Paul mentioned, Streamline Athletes is a Canadian company, and we built this for high school athletes that are looking to go to college. We want to help more track and field athletes figure out what they want in a university and find these schools that meet their needs. We can also help you package your information and get directly in touch with coaches at those schools that interest you. But today I'm really going to give you the basics of recruitment and a high-level look of what it means for athletes and families like you that are in the track and field space. There's going to be tons of time for questions at the end, like Paul mentioned. But for now, I'll do my best to give you insight and material to help you navigate this process. If you have an event-specific question, or are you curious about something to do with your personal situation, if I don't answer those questions during the presentation or at the end, we can absolutely find some time to connect either with me or with someone else on my team outside of today's session. So without further ado, I'll get started. Here, hang on. There we go. Okay. So to put it simply, are really why we built Streamline Athletes. All of us were collegiate track and field athletes, and sports built the foundation for who we are as human beings. And whether it's track and field or any other sport, being a student athlete is a really special opportunity at all levels. And you see the second point there is everything is a level up. It's the truth. School is going to get tougher. Training and competition is going to become more heightened, more difficult, more challenging. And if you're ready to rise to those opportunities, then collegiate athletics is something that you should absolutely consider pursuing. If you take one thing away from this presentation as a whole, please let it be from this slide. That last point, there is a place for everybody in our sport at the collegiate level. And the next couple topics are hopefully going to show you why that is. So whether your goals are to participate, get better as an individual, join a community of athletes within an athletic department, win championships, or some combination of the above, there's a place for you within the 1,500 plus colleges and universities with teams across North America. There's different organizations that run our sport, and I've listed a couple of them there between Canada and the USA. NCAA is one that you've probably heard of. There's also other ones like the NAIA, NJCAA, U Sports, and the CCAA within Canada. And they all have different things to offer. Of course, we'll get into those things in a little bit. You know, when you're picking a school, you're going to be making a decision based on academics, finances, location, resources available to you as an athlete and a student, the relationships you build with the coach and your teammates. But it can be really, really helpful to know what each of those associations and organizations offer in your back pocket as you're making a decision. And I'm going to look, you know, I said here, schools ranging from 800 students to over 50,000. There are tons of implications that come with school size. And it's not just, you know, there's big schools and little schools. There's everything in between. And it's a very personal decision as to whether those things, you know, what matters to you more. And like I said, we'll go into more detail, but just keep in mind that it's a huge range of opportunity. Let's look specifically at Canada for now. With the exception of 2 BC schools, which are the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser University, all major Canadian universities compete within the U Sports organization, which is a national governing body of university athletics in Canada. There's 56 schools and 4 conferences nationwide. In Ontario specifically, there's 15 different schools with track and field and cross country programs within the Ontario University Athletics Conference, otherwise called OUA. So there's a range of opportunity right on your doorstep, just as much as there is in other provinces across the country and looking south below the border. The point at the bottom of U Sports there that says 2 varsity seasons, cross country and indoor track and field, this is not as well known as I'd like it to be. So I'm happy I get to share it with you all today. Most schools and clubs that wear, most schools have clubs that wear the same school colors and still travel and compete as a team in the outdoor season, but there are only national championships and intercollegiate competition for cross country and indoor track and field in Canada. This is because of a choice to align with the vision of Athletics Canada and Athletics Ontario and the other provincial governing sport organizations. The U Sports indoor track and field season ends in March, which gives U Sports student athletes the opportunity to take a much needed break from competition and put in a solid block of training before their summer season begins. The real reason behind all of this is, the reality is that we just don't have as many people in Canada, and we don't have as many athletes in Canada. And so asking our student athletes to be at their best level of competition for their university careers, if it's a middle distance athlete that also runs cross country like I was, you're going to be asked to be at your best for conference and national competition in cross country season, in indoor season, and to ask them to continue doing that again through outdoor, and then also throughout the summer for those that have the opportunity to compete for their province and for their country is a lot. And not having an outdoor season is designed to mitigate that. I know that many of our top teams at the university level would really like everybody to know that there's obviously still opportunities to compete outdoor and you'll still be able to train with your team, but I just wanted to make that point really clear. U Sports athletes also benefit from more eligibility, and that means years to compete. I'm going to go into all this a little bit further later, but they can compete for a total of 5 academic years. whereas in the NCAA, you only get 4 years of athletic competition. And that's one perk of youth sports that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. This next organization that's listed is called the CCAA. It's a lesser known association of colleges and universities across Canada. It's cross-country focused, but there's definitely some schools and some divisions of this association that still have indoor and middle distance track. And then the final point that I wanted to make about opportunities in Canada is that there's scholarships within athletic scholarships, or in Canada they're called athletic financial awards, within both youth sports and within the CCAA, but we'll get into scholarships a bit later. Looking towards the United States, NCAA Division I is definitely the most well-known spot for collegiate athletics. As Paul mentioned when he introed me, I competed in the Division I in Division I of the NCAA when I was at school. But the reality is that there's other opportunities that are just as important to explore. And since, you know, my time as a student athlete has passed, my time as a recruiter at a university has passed, I can see that, you know, when I was being recruited, I didn't know about Division II. I didn't know about Division III or the NAIA, and I regret not doing more research and understanding those opportunities, because they're different, and there's neither that are better or worse. There's just about what's important to you as an athlete and what's important to your family. So when you're looking at the NCAA, there's 3 different divisions, and the biggest difference between these 3 divisions is the depth of competition. So there are Division I, Division II, and Division III schools that have a level of competition that's equal to one another. So if you look at the national championships, for example, did I do that, or did someone else do that? That's cool. Sorry, hold on. My screen's just gone black for 1 second here. HDMI cord, there we go. Okay, so as I was saying, there's Division I, Division II, and Division III schools that all compete at the same meets, because track and field is largely an individual sport until you get to your conference or your national level competition. And there's many top level athletes that will overlap. So just because you're going to a Division II or even a Division III school doesn't mean that it's a lesser than option. It's just different. And another point that I wanted to point out is Division III is the one division within the NCAA that doesn't actually offer athletic scholarships, but the NCAA reports that more than 75% of student athletes that compete within Division III do receive financial aid. It just comes from other sources: outside aid, merit-based aid, academics aid, and other sort of grants and funding opportunities made available to athletes. The next associate, oh yeah, I didn't mention this, but Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia is Canada's NCAA school. It competes within Division II, and that means that its competition schedule largely exists within the US. When it comes to the NAIA, again, another association with different pros and cons. One thing that sets the NAIA apart is the opportunity to compete in the marathon, the half marathon, and race walk events. It's the only association that allows the race walkers and the long distance athletes to shine and show their stuff in their own events. And Canada does have one NAIA school in the University of British Columbia. The University of British Columbia is a little bit different. They compete within the Canadian Youth Sports Organization for their cross-country season. And then for their outdoor track and field season, they compete within the NAIA. Some athletes at UBC do indoor meets, but it's not a team or varsity sport at University of British Columbia. The final point on this slide is the NJCAA, and this is the National Junior Colleges Athletics Association. This is a league for many 2-year schools, but there's also 4-year schools that are involved. You can, get diplomas, associate's degrees, and in some cases, bachelor's degrees as well. Many athletes see these schools as their home for the duration of their studies, but others see it as a stepping stone to other opportunities after a few years of academic or athletic development. I mentioned earlier about this word eligibility, or years to compete. It's measured differently in each of these organizations. There's a term called red shirting within NAIA and within the NCAA that is essentially sitting out for a year of competition. You can do that because of injury. You can do that because you just have a co-op going on. There's many, many reasons why you might want to sit out of a year of competition, and it's allowed, but the rules differ. And so this is where I wanted to draw the largest comparison with youth sports. There's not an age limit in the same way that there is in the U.S. So in the NCAA, you can't compete for a few years and then go traveling and come back and be 26 years old and be competing in the NCAA. There's just rules restricted around that. And versus in youth sports, there's still rules, but on a smaller scale. And so if you need to sit out for a couple of years as opposed to just one, or maybe you suffer multiple injuries throughout, or whatever reason that you really have for wanting to sit out, you have more of an opportunity to return to sport and compete for a longer duration of time in your life within youth sports. And after this presentation, we have lots of blog articles and other resources that can give you greater insight into a lot of these differences between Canada, between the US, and between schools themselves. So we'll make sure we share these resources with you for you to be able to do deeper research outside of this session. This next slide is really self-explanatory, but it's important to understand what recruitment is fundamentally. It's when any representative of any university, college, or program contacts you, your coaches, your parents, your high school teachers, in some cases your principal, with the intention of enrolling you in their school and adding you to their team's roster. Being recruited is really exciting, and there used to be, this next slide will kind of touch on this a little bit more, but there's this question of who's going to talk to me and when are they going to talk to me and how is it going to happen? Recruitment can be as simple as, maybe you come in the top 100 at the OFSA cross country championship and you get handed a letter at the finish line. I remember that used to happen when I was in high school. And it would be, hey, you scored top 100 in OFSA and we're interested in you because of your talent. That's recruitment. So is getting a personal visit from a coach. So is meeting a coach at a random track meet and having them ask about your performances. All of those things fall under the bundle of recruitment. And who do you communicate with when you're being recruited? It's so different for every school, and every school chooses to do things differently for different reasons. So if you're in communication with one university and you're speaking with the head coach, or in some cases this is called the director of track and field, they're usually the highest level decision maker. That can be one option. You might talk to a recruiter, you might talk to somebody else within the athletic department at another school. It doesn't necessarily mean that because one school's head coach is talking to you, they're more interested in you than this school's recruiter is speaking to you. It's not a reflection on your talents or how much they care about recruiting you. It's simply about how they construct their recruitment outreach and the way that they choose to organize things within their program. Oh yes, this last point here, current and former student athletes. This is a huge piece. The reality about recruitment is that you're making this decision that's arguably one of the biggest decisions in your life. And I don't say that to overwhelm you or scare you. It should be exciting. A big piece of this is that you're going to be on a team of people for 4 or 5 years. And in many cases, there'll be, people from all different walks of life, people who compete in the same events as you, people who are doing different disciplines, men and women if you're on a dual gender team. And current and former student athletes will provide the best insight for what it feels like to be a student athlete in that specific program. So I highly recommend throughout your recruiting conversations, if you have the opportunity to speak with a student athlete who's currently on the team, to take it or to ask for that opportunity if for whatever reason it's not offered to you. So how do we connect with schools when we're being recruited? Really, this slide should show you that it can happen in any way. Coaches are using Snapchat, coaches are finding you on Instagram DMs, you can reach out on Instagram, you can still use email, phone call, there's still gonna be letters in the mail. And then you can look at online recruiting platforms like Streamline Athletes, where you can reach and also be reached by coaches who are within our network. This 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th point here is visits, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about what visits usually look like, and then some of the differences that are happening now with the current situation of COVID-19 in the world. So no stress, we'll talk more about visits a little bit later. But I did want to highlight this last point a little bit more deeply. You don't have to wait for a letter in the mail anymore. You can take control of your recruitment by discovering what's important to you and contacting those schools yourself. What should I consider when deciding where to go to school? This first slide talks about the academic side, and you are going to be very tired of hearing this first question by the time you're done your recruitment, even if you know the answer. As a 16, 17-year-old kid, I had no idea what I wanted to study. I went in thinking I'd want to do kinesiology, and I came out with a communications degree in public relations. I ping-ponged around many times before that, so don't worry if you don't know what you want to study. Knowing can simply help you. Knowing what you're interested in focusing on can help you narrow things down, but it's definitely not necessary. Moving down that list a little bit, the whole where can you be accepted piece and the admissions requirement piece. Every school is different on what they have to offer and their acceptance rates and how much academic prowess it takes to achieve a degree at those institutions. But the biggest piece here is just learning how to be a bit realistic about the opportunities that you're afforded based on your grades, based on any entrance exams you might have had to take, like the SAT or the ACT, and just knowing that one rejection doesn't mean that you're not worth, getting a college education or finding another opportunity, because I think I've made it clear now that with more than 1,500 options with, track and field and cross-country programs, there's definitely a school that wants you. This last piece here, the learning environment bullet point, is really important, and nobody can tell you whether or not you, care about class size or care about how many people are in your lecture hall, but you have to kind of decide what learning environment is going to be important to you. Do you want to be one person sitting in a lecture hall of 500 people for the first 2 years of all your classes like I was? Or would you prefer to be in class sizes under 30 right away, or something in between? There's pros and cons to both sides of those arguments. It's just about determining what feels right for you. Another piece of consideration here, and these are all questions that you can ask your coaches and ask the coaches of schools you're interested in, is about that learning environment and what it looks like. Is it professors teaching, tenured professors teaching all of your classes, or is it really up to the teaching assistants to drive you through? What kind of tutoring resources are available? Things like study hall and other opportunities for student athletes to make sure that they are getting the help and support that they need to get through their degrees, despite being extremely busy with traveling, competition, etc. When you turn to the athletic sides of things, we talked a lot about the associations, the divisions, and which conferences could be right for you. Again, you're probably not going to go, oh, D2 is right for me, and then just pick from that bucket of schools. There really is an opportunity for you to go, okay, well, this school that's close to home, I like for these reasons. This one in Division 2 sounds good to me because I had a really good chat with the coach there. But there's also this junior college that has this crazy aeronautical trades program that I've not seen anywhere else, and I'm interested in looking at that. The reality is, it's just about picking the pieces that are important to you and finding the different options that are available. So if you're a javelin thrower, you probably want to be at a school that offers outdoor track and field as a varsity sport. Maybe you don't really care. Maybe you're willing to help out with different throws events during the indoor season. These are just things that you have to make those decisions for yourself. What event groups are available? Some programs don't have the facilities available to host events like pole vault. And so that's a question that you can ask up front. When it comes to coaching staff, we mean, what are the accolades of those coaches? How long have they been coaching? What are their coaching philosophies or styles? And then, who would be your coach? Is your event coach also the program's head coach? Maybe it's an assistant coach that you'd be working directly with. These are all things you can take into consideration. When I'm talking about facilities here, I mean, is there access to an indoor track if you're in somewhere that has a very robust winter, like I know you're all very used to? Is there an outdoor track available to me? What is the local conditions like for when I want to go on my long runs? Are there trails? Is everything concrete? Maybe you don't do long runs, so that doesn't matter to you. Some schools are going to have physical therapy opportunities and athletic training rooms with a full team of staff available to help you with injury prevention and recovery. Some teams are going to have access to a varsity gym, and there's all sorts of combinations of everything in between. All of this information is available on Streamline Athletes. We've built program pages for every institution in the NCAA, the NAIA, youth sports, etc. And we do things like list the coaching staff so that you can read their bios and learn more about them, list each of the facilities and give you some pictures and information about this. And we do our best to keep it updated over time so that you don't have to go Googling every university you're looking at. It should all be in one place. This location piece is pretty self-explanatory. And some athletes, you know, I can't tell you how many kids I talk to every day, athletes who I talk to every day that ask me whether or not they should consider going to school far away. I was a bit of a wild child. I knew right away I wanted some kind of different experience from living in the Vancouver area, and I figured that Texas was the best opportunity to experience a new culture. Maybe that's not you. Maybe you want to stay close to home. Maybe you thought about visiting somewhere else, but in light of recent events, you're thinking that a local university makes more sense to you. I was a greedy 17-year-old. All I really cared about was I want to go somewhere sunny and far away from home. My parents didn't really get it, but that's all right. I made it through. And then another piece here is that bottom section. And sometimes being in a big city also means you're going to be in a big university, but you could be in a college town, you know, where the university drives the population of that city, and you're surrounded by people who are going through and experiencing the same things as you, and that the college is really the center of the town, or maybe you're looking at somewhere in the middle. When it comes to finances, only you and your family can determine what's the best route to pay for school. Tuition costs in Canada versus the States. Tuition in Canada is generally lower across the board, especially if you look in province, and most especially when you factor in the Canadian dollar value versus the cost of university in the US. There's universities that can cost as little as $1,000 a semester, and there's private universities that can run a total cost of more than $100,000 US dollars per year. Some of those are private schools. But what I would caution you to do is not let the sticker prices of schools scare you, because if you're willing to do the work, you can take the time to look at the different financial aid options available to you through the institution, through outside scholarships. Maybe you're going to qualify for some academic aid, or maybe you'll be up for the elusive full scholarship on the athletic side, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit. At the bottom there, you'll see a piece about hidden costs. You have to be prepared to pay for certain things on top of your tuition, like books and fees and housing, and then also some entertainment money. A few other things that student athletes don't think about when they're looking at going to university in the US below the border is the mandatory cost of health insurance as an international student athlete. And of course, this applies to schools in Canada or in the US. If you're far away and you need to pay for a flight home for the holidays, make sure you think about that too. What about scholarships? Scholarships are every athlete's dream. I was lucky enough to attain an athletic scholarship, but it was not a full ride. And the reality of this is that scholarships are always going to be a puzzle, and things are not a guaranteed four-year deal. So I'm going to talk a bit freely about this. I know that you guys are going to have more questions about scholarships, so feel free to put them in the chat. I will answer them as best as I can. But there's some realities that are facts that you guys need to know. For some reason, scholarships and American institutions have kind of become synonymous with full athletic rides, and it's just not as common as you might think. But first, let's look at U Sports. U Sports caps athletic financial awards at books, tuition, and fees. Each association is actually given institutions, you know, the opportunity to make different rules at their own level. So if you look at Ontario specifically, you guys might know this, but your scholarship from an athletic standpoint will be capped at $4,500 per year. And that's a decision that Ontario has made to level the playing field across universities that have different funding opportunities or more funding opportunities. But it doesn't mean you can't get more things covered, because in many cases, academic and athletic scholarships can be stacked. And so you might earn a few $1,000s from the athletic department. You might have some, you know, need-based aid that comes to you, or maybe your grades from high school earn you an academic scholarship, and all of those things can come into play. Turning our attention to the US. Division I, like I mentioned earlier, is always seen as sort of this pinnacle of success in university track and field. But the reality is that Division I in the NCAA and Division II offer almost the same amount of scholarships that the NCAA allows schools to give out. Having said that, on the men's side, it's 12.6 scholarships to split amongst the entire team. The women's side in Division I, that's 18 full ride equivalences that can be split amongst the entire team. But the reality is that not every institution has that funding available to give out. So just because you're talking to an American school and you know that they have the opportunity to give out a full ride, it doesn't mean that you're going to qualify for one. And even if you seem to qualify for one on paper, it doesn't mean that you're going to get one. Scholarship options and offers are always up to the discretion of the coach that you're working with, the athletic department, and then of course your academic standing comes into play there as well. And so partial scholarships are definitely way more common, and those can range anywhere from a 1% scholarship, which usually includes books. It amounts to $1,000 or a few thousand per year, all the way up to you know, a guaranteed full ride, which in the US it is true that full rides would cover absolutely everything that you would need and then some. So, you know, books, tuition and fees, your housing, a stipend for food, and then other amenities on top of it that totally depend on the athletic department and the funding available to that institution. And I guess to be more clear or a little less kind of jargony, schools with big football programs who win at the national level are going to have a lot more money than schools without. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everyone can find opportunities in corners they never expected, and schools can be creative with the funding that they have. So, you know, there's this idea that a 75% scholarship, oh, I got a 75% scholarship to this school, and you talk to someone who got a 90% scholarship at that school. But the two schools cost $50,000 different from one another. And the 90% scholarship at a school that costs 80 grand is going to amount to less money than a 75% scholarship to a state school that costs, you know, $7,000 a year. Let me just make sure I'm not missing anything clear here. Okay, with all that being said, I would love to take more specific questions about scholarships, but I want to make sure that there's time to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world today. This graphic does cover differences between athletic scholarships, and again, I'm going to include this in an email so you guys have all this available to you. I'm glazing over it a little bit because I think it's really important that we have lots of time for questions. Oh, this piece, sorry guys, I skipped ahead in my notes. So what do coaches need to know about you? When it comes to recruitment, it's very, very simple. Let's make it as easy as possible for coaches to get to know you, who you are as a person, who you are in your training, and then your goals and you know, what kind of path you need to do to make it there. And so this one piece I want to make sure is clear is your athletic information and your academic info. Proof is going to be really important here. So at some point, when you're applying to school, you're going to need your academic transcripts, and you might as well get that stuff collected up early so that you can show coaches right off the bat how serious you are about your recruitment. And the same thing is true with your performances. Telling a coach that you can run a certain speed for an 800 meter is great, but if you can prove that you did it in a race and you can prove that you won that race or you were in the middle of the pack or whatever, that's what they want to see. So they want to see a direct link to your results that proves that you ran that race and gives them a little bit more context around, you know, how that race went. And then make sure to add some personality. I can't tell you, as a coach and a recruiter, they are sifting through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails from athletes from all over the world with varying degrees of information about who they are. Just make it simple for coaches to say yes and be interested in you. Tell them who you are. Give them information about what your training has looked like. And of course, include any of your basic contact information, including information about your parents in case they want to get in touch with them or with your high school and club coach for more information. Now we're on to our COVID-19 piece. Due to the current global pandemic, what normal recruiting has looked like has changed a little bit. So I normally would have had a slide in here about a timeline when it comes to recruitment. When are you going to start talking with coaches? And then when do things progress from a conversation by email, by phone, maybe by video chat, to an in-person visit, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, it's just not safe to be traveling around right now. And so for that reason, the NCAA and other associations have made some changes in terms of what is allowed to be conducted. So the NCAA has announced that they're closely monitoring COVID-19 just as everybody is, and making sure to take proactive measures to mitigate the impact of the virus. And so with that being said, official visits, unofficial visits, all off-campus in-person recruiting is not allowed. So even though you might be looking at a local university and you might be interested in meeting up with the coach for a conversation because you personally don't feel affected by the virus, it's simply not allowed. And whether coaches choose to go beyond those rules is sort of neither here nor there and outside this conversation. But just know that these rules have been put in place to keep you safe, keep the campuses safe, and make it easier for things to open up and go back to normal when the time comes. So, okay, again, I sort of mentioned the NCAA, but each association is doing their own, making their own decisions on a national level, and institutions are going to do things how they see fit on a local level. But the reality is that in-person recruitment has continued to be banned for longer periods of time as we roll on. Right now, everything seems to be suspended until June 15th. I'm no expert, but something tells me it's going to be extended even further. So when we look at what's going to be affected for 2020 recruits, so there's definitely still athletes, and you guys might be some of them, looking for a home for 2020. Your opportunities are still there. We can't guarantee anything, but there's still scholarship money floating around if that's what you're looking for. But the reality is that there's definitely some changes for what school is going to look like when you show up in September. Obviously, every school is deciding whether or not they're going to have school online, in person, some combination of the two. But there's definitely some effects that have been put into place as of recently that we can kind of announce and let you know about. So youth sports has suspended all fall sports, including cross country. And that just means that competition schedules are changing, and it's remains to be seen as to whether athletes are still going to be able to compete against each other on a local level and with new rules in place. But for now, youth sports has suspended cross country, and their decisions about indoor track and outdoor track kind of remain to be seen. And then the other greatest effect that has on 2020 recruiting class is travel restrictions. You haven't had the opportunity to visit a school. You're not going to get it now. And so, making the decision to pick a school sight unseen, as it's called, that means when you don't ever have a chance to visit the school, but you still select it, it can be a scary thing. But the beautiful piece of this is that, it means you don't have to take time away to go and spend time at these schools, and you can take advantage of some of the new resources that are becoming available, like virtual tour. Definitely, I really highly recommend taking a look at all of the different social media pages you can find for the schools themselves, the athletic programs, and also any of the teammates you might be getting to know throughout the recruiting process. Something interesting for those being recruited for 2021 and beyond. The reality is that many of the associations are giving back years of eligibility for those athletes that missed a season of competition, either now or in the upcoming fall. And what that means is that many juniors and senior athletes, so, athletes in their third and fourth or fifth and sixth year, depending on where you're looking, are allowed to come back and compete for an extra year. And this is going to affect athletic scholarship availability, especially for athletes that are kind of in the middle of the road and might be able to earn kind of a partial to about a 75% scholarship. And yeah, the reality is just that if a top athlete who's holding a full ride comes back for another year, that money's no longer been freed up to be given to an athlete in the incoming recruiting class. And I think that based on my conversations with many coaches around the continent, is probably the biggest change that's going to affect the 2021 grads. But I don't say this to scare you. Opportunities are still going to be available for you. You just have to know where to look. The bottom line here is to just continue referring to your local authorities when you're questioning travel restrictions. And, you know, I sort of said this already, but associations like NCAA, U Sports, et cetera, are on the brink of making these nationwide decisions that are going to give you the clarity that you're looking for. But until then, each institution, athletic department, and team are making adjustments on like a week-by-week basis with the newest information that they have available. There we go. COVID-19, how can we help? The reality is, even with all the craziness that's going on in the world, at some point things are going to return back to normal, and teams need to plan for that, and so do you. You guys need to continue planning for your future, and now is still the time to plan for that collegiate athletics future. We're here to help you during this unique period. Without practices or competition, college coaches are keen and at home, keen to spend time focused on building their teams for the future, and you're a huge part of that. Parents and guardians, you can help your athletes with this decision by supporting them as they do their research. And really, I think the biggest piece that I want you guys all to take away from this is it's really important to write stuff down. When research is becoming really a huge focus, and you can't really, you know, you can talk to coaches on video, you can talk to coaches on the phone, and that relationship piece is really, really huge. But the research that you're doing is becoming ever more important as you don't have the opportunity to get that feeling when you step on a college campus and go, yeah, I can see myself here. But you can still find that out by reading, looking at pictures, watching videos, and just really keeping track of all the different opportunities that you've explored. The last piece here that I think is really important to note is because about not being able to do those visits, start looking deeper into the cities that are surrounding the schools that you're looking at. You have the opportunity to browse through hundreds of schools online using our service or just using Google. And it's important to see if your hobbies are going to be supported in the communities around the city that you are looking at. I have some slides here that were going to kind of be a bonus if we had a bunch of time to talk about, what our platform looks like specifically. But I think, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's probably going to be some questions, and I think that we should make sure that we have an opportunity to answer those specific questions before we tune out.
Yeah, we can take some time to answer some questions, and then also if we have any time after that, we can then also go back to some of your slides. So
Sure.
for all the folks on the call, what I'm going to do is enable everybody to unmute themselves, and then you can, if you want to ask a question, you can ask a question, or conversely, you can type it into the chat function, and I'll ask the question for you. So I'm gonna ask a question first off, Alison, while people are starting to think about it.
Sure.
When we talk about athletes talking to schools and coaches, I believe that there's an age when athletes are not allowed to talk to schools and coaches, and your recommendations on how they can manage that if they're not at that age yet.
Great question, Paul. Again, this is one of those pieces where it totally depends on the association that you're looking at, but I'll start with the most restrictive and work my way down from there. The NCAA does not allow any form of recruiting for athletes that are in grade 10 before June 15th. So what day is it today? June 10th. In 5 days, those of you who are just finishing up your grade 10 year, it's technically open season for you to begin to be recruited by NCAA schools. NAIA and U Sports have lesser restrictions, and technically conversations could begin kind of as early as grade 9 or even throughout grade 10. But that takes time, and maintaining the momentum of the relationship over a year, 2 years, 3 years, up to 4 years, it can be, pretty crazy. If you have the opportunity to talk to coaches year over year and continue to share with them about your progression as an athlete and the students and continue to learn about how the team is evolving, then that's incredible. But the reality is when it comes to timeline in Canada, the majority of coaches are doing their recruitment in grade 12. So they'll begin to reach out to you kind of in the fall, and scholarship offers and acceptance can go all the way up until, March, April, May, even now still the opportunities exist. And in the US, top level programs begin to look at kids right away as they graduate from grade 10 and move towards their grade 11 year. And then I'm going to kind of mention something I didn't before that's of the same vein. If you're looking for scholarships, many programs, I would even go as far as to say most programs, prefer to have all their recruiting done before Christmas of that grade 12 year. So it's always hard because my caveat is there's always opportunity, and there really, really is if you know where to look for it. But the reality is being proactive, doing things a little bit younger and reaching out as soon as you have the ability to do so. So to let coaches know that you're interested in their program is definitely going to be your best bet to make sure that they're thinking about you earlier on and that you're showing your interest so that they maintain their interest in you.
Okay, great, Alison. Another question from the chat. Can you explain about carded athletes in Canada? Are they excluded from scholarships?
Carded athletes in Canada, I would want to make sure that I double check my research on this, but no, they are not excluded from athletic scholarships, but there's definitely some consideration that will be taken. So if a coach knows that you're receiving funding from an outside source, it's possible that they would choose to withhold money because they know that you're getting the funding that you need to pay for your education. And also there are definitely some navigation that needs to happen in order to see whether or not you're eligible to receive scholarship funding in the US. But I would be remiss to tell you that that answer is a solid, fully correct and robust answer, because I would want to make sure that I check my sources.
Okay, great. There's a question specific to UBC. Does UBC currently have sprints and jumps still competing at UBC?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If you want to follow up about, you could give me some context about why you thought there wouldn't be, and maybe I could shed some light there, but simple answer is yes.
Okay. And a question was about coaches. Why would coaches choose to recruit through Streamline Athletes instead of, wouldn't they just prefer to receiving personalized emails directly from the athlete?
Mm-hmm. You know what? Once upon a time, I would say, yeah, personalized email from the athlete is the way to go, because it shows, that you're taking attention to detail and contacting the coaches that mean a lot to you. But the reality is that athletes and families might have a hard time understanding this. There's more than 1 million high school track and field athletes in the U.S. Things are smaller in Canada, and if you're in that upper echelon, the top kind of 5 or even up to 2 and 1%, the coaches that want you are going to find out who you are, but things still get missed. We have a lot of rural communities in Canada, especially now, that don't have access to high-level competitions to allow you to, get your PRs in order and present your best athletic self to coaches. But there's a way to tell that story in a really, really clean way. And I think that that's probably the biggest value that I hope you guys take away from Streamline Athletes as an opportunity, because you put all your information in once, and at the click of a button, the coaches will receive all of that packaged nicely. And then also we work with coaches to understand what they're looking for in student athletes from an athletic and an academic standpoint. We know, for more than 75% of the institutions in Canada, we have scholarship standards and walk-on standards at the very least on file, which helps you guys get an answer right away for a university that might not be a good fit for you for one reason or another. And then if you flip that around and look from the coach's perspective, they know that when an athlete's contacting them through Streamline Athletes, they've already done their research using our program pages and determining that You know, the simple to cross off stuff like the academic program you're looking at exists at that institution. You know, they know that you're serious about being recruited for the purpose of track and field. And they know that you are genuinely interested in their program. This isn't something that we've talked about, but we limit the amount of ongoing conversations that athletes can have for the purpose of making sure that you guys are serious about the schools that you're talking to. I sometimes joke that it's like dating. If you try to date more than 5 universities and kind of court with 5 coaches at once, it's overwhelming for both parties. And so I would circle back to the original answer to the question is simply that coaches know what they're getting when they see an interest email from an athlete through Streamline Athletes.
Okay, great, Alison. Thank you for that. And there's a few other questions regarding specifics on how to leverage the Streamline Athlete system and program itself. And I'm going to suggest that folks, you can contact you guys directly and take those questions offline, as we'll never have time to go through all the ins and outs of the actual system. But I got a couple other questions that I want to make sure I get in before we sign off here. One is around
Sure.
Around a victory lap, and of course there's lots of talk about victory lap, and there's probably going to be more victory laps this year, and the eligibility for still getting scholarships. And I know that you talked a little bit about eligibility, number of years, and being able to redshirt and take time off as well. And as you answer that question, I also want you to consider that I do believe, I used to believe that if a athlete had a scholarship in a U.S. school and then came back to Canada, that counted as 1 year eligibility within the Canadian school system, in terms of they've got 5 years of eligibility to compete within the Canadian school system. If they competed 1 year down in the States, they would have 4 years left in Canada. But my understanding was that if I was a Canadian athlete and I competed 1 year in Canada and then went down to the States didn't care how many years I had competed in Canada. I could have competed for 4 and then gone down to the States. Is that still the case? And answer the question about the victory lap as well.
Sure, yeah. So I'll start by saying that it's typical that well-known associations like youth sports, NAI, and NCAA, they recognize one another's eligibility clocks and the differences that they provide. So with the idea that competing in youth sports would or wouldn't take away eligibility from the NCAA, what we've also learned, what we've also learned is that eligibility is, there's guidelines in place, but hard and fast rules don't really exist. And it's a lot about interpretation, and that can happen on an institutional level. It can also happen within that conference or that sort of league of participation. And so there's really no clean rule of, you know, oh, you competed for 2 years and you only have 2 years left. There's other things that can be taken into consideration, Paul, and I think that that's kind of what you're referring to as far as whether or not athletes will lose years of eligibility. Definitely your years of competition within the NAI and the NCAA will take away from your opportunities within youth sports as far as years of eligibility to compete. But if you go, like, let's say you compete for 2 years in the NCAA and you come back, you still have 3 in youth sports. So that extra year of eligibility still gives you, you know, some leeway and some time to play with. The other thing that's different is that in the NCAA Division I, it's called an eligibility clock, and it starts the year after you graduate from high school, or the first semester that you're enrolled full-time at any institution, whether you're an athlete or not. So if you, and that's really to put top-end age restrictions on things. So if you graduate high school in grade 12, and 1 year later, your eligibility clock begins. If you don't graduate until after grade 13, 1 year later, your eligibility clock would begin. So as much as these are, you know, rules, there's still going to be differing rules and differing kind of end goals depending on your experience. And then there's also something else to consider, which I know you guys are next to Quebec, so the idea of stage up, I won't go into it too deeply, but this is like a middle ground between high school and college, or high school and university. It's kind of can be seen as like a junior college, and it's required in Quebec, where in grade 12, you can have the opportunity to choose in Ontario to go back for a victory lap in grade, I love that you guys call it victory lap, in grade 13 or not, but it doesn't, grade 13 is not going to force you to lose eligibility on any level. But as far as to kind of come back, I just want to make sure to answer that original victory lap question. Was it about, you know, why somebody would or wouldn't take a victory lap, or just what happens if you do?
I think it's more about, am I still eligible to get a scholarship?
Yes. Okay. Simple answer. Yes, definitely. If you're being recruited out of grade 12 and you're getting scholarship offers, and you choose to, you know, renege them or defer them and go back and do grade 13, it doesn't mean that you're ineligible to receive aid in the future, academically or athletically. But if you say no to a scholarship, there's zero guarantee that that same offer will exist for you the next year, regardless of your performance. And that's just budget management and the reality that coaches have to make sacrifices in who they recruit.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Now a question specific around para-athletes. Are there any programs out there for the para-athletics and scholarships such in Canada and the US?
The NCAA and the NAIA and JCAA and U Sports don't have a para league. There are universities that provide alternative opportunities, and when I say alternative opportunities, I mean funding for para athletes, but it's not considered a varsity sport at the association level. And I think that the reason for that, and maybe this is just my kind of assumption, but it's about volume and it's about you know, widespread opportunities all the way around. I believe that we will one day move towards varsity collegiate athletic opportunities for para athletes. You know, one example of that would be my NCAA Division I school, University of Texas Arlington. We had a wheelchair basketball team called the Movin' Mavs, and they did not compete within the NCAA. It's a different league, but they, you know, would win national championships, and they had their own league. So, to put it simply, the opportunities that do exist at the collegiate level for para athletes are independent of the associations that exist, but there's, you know, probably some overlap in terms of eligibility and how things work from a rules and regulations standpoint if you're looking at one of those leagues.
And how would a para-athlete find information about that?
I regret that there's not more readily available information for para athletes. You know, as a nation, I think that Athletics Canada is doing more to, you know, specifically for para track and field athletes to encompass and find opportunities. But the reality is that we're just not there yet. And Streamline Athletes doesn't have a, you know, robust database of para athlete opportunities. So I think that, unfortunately, my advice there would be look to your PSOs, Paul, and look to Athletics Canada for some guidance there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alison. Is there, if I start with a small scholarship, is the likelihood that if I do really, really well, I could increase my scholarship in future years?
Yes, there is a likely opportunity for that. This is something that I think that many athletes don't necessarily understand, that their scholarships are not necessarily guaranteed for 4 years. So they're going to be up for discussion each year, and that can be good and bad. You're not going to be penalized for injury, for other outside issues that you can't control, and there's rules in place to protect athletes from diminishing scholarship returns. But it's very important going in, if you're not receiving a full ride or you're not receiving an offer that you were hoping for, and you'd like to increase that due to increased performance over year, just be very and upfront about that, and ask the coaches you're talking to what it would take to earn the dollar value that you're looking for in future years, and they'll give you an answer. And some schools are different. You know, there's schools that are looking to win their conference meet, and those are their goals, and they will scholarship athletes according to, you know, what they need in order to win their conference championship. And there's teams that are looking to win national championships, and that's true for youth sports. That's true for every association that exists. And again, those scholarship athletes will be, you know, given opportunities based on their ability to score points at nationals. And so I think the best advice I could give you about will my scholarship go up or will it go down is work hard in the classroom, be a positive influence on your teammates, and have regular conversations about expectations surrounding performance with your event coach and with your head coach.
And I'm assuming that that would also apply to somebody who went to a university without a scholarship. There's still an opportunity that if they did really well, they could get one in future years.
Absolutely. You know, some coaches have different philosophies on this, but I talk to coaches every day, and I would say I can't put a number on it, but so many of them, they want to always share that they take care of their own. And if somebody develops under the team's care and, you know, earns an amount that they deserve, they'll be given that opportunity. But again, it's not going to happen for you if you don't ask for it. And I think that setting realistic expectations for yourself, as well as setting real, you know, goals within the program and communicating about it is your best option in order to access those opportunities down the road.
Okay, great. I know we're just run out of time here, but I got two more questions I'm going to ask and before we go, and then we'll there's a couple other questions that have not been answered, and I'll try and get them from Alison and post them later on. But the two questions I have left, first is, do you believe or have any opinions on whether the pandemic has lessened the overall amount of funding available for OUA athletic assistants? Do you know?
I have opinions about it, yes. So I'll be brief. The reality is that many schools in Canada specifically, their funding comes from international students, and their funding comes from fundraising and, you know, summer classes and admissions and enrollment. So if we see a decrease in enrollment, we're going to see a decrease in overall budget. Many coaches are facing budget freezes and budget cuts, and, you know, some are worried that they're you know, we've seen already in some schools in the U.S. have had to cut certain teams, and that's really, really sad. But there's other measures in place to try to mitigate these options. And one of those is cutting the amount of travel and the amount of competitions that universities attend. So if a budget is cut by 15% and, you know, there's, you know, a certain decrease in the amount of travel and the money that needs to be spent on that travel, then the budget overall is not going to be super effective. In Canada, track and field is largely volunteer driven, and people who love the sport are going to continue driving things forward. And the same is true for the coaches. Coaches are navigating this just the same as athletes are, and they're looking for more fundraising opportunities, and they're looking for ways to make sure that their athletes are going to have the same opportunities, their future athletes are going to have the same opportunities as the ones did before pandemic. Pandemic.
Okay, and last question. Alison, you and I talked a little bit about this a couple of days ago with respect to the fact that with a 2020 outdoor season gone, many of the athletes are not going to have the ability to post any times this outdoor season. And that my understanding is that the universities are going to use whatever results the athletes have, whether it was from indoor season or from last outdoor season, or from whatever it was. They're going to look at those results and make their best judgments based on that, because it's the only thing that they have readily available. Is that kind of how you would answer that?
It is, and I would venture to say that there's other ways to show who you are as an athlete. Video footage of your skills, whether you're a sprinter and that's block starts, or you're a field eventer and you can show video footage of how you look going over the bar or jumping into the pit. Those are to show your rudimentary skills as an athlete is going to be really, really helpful to support coaches as they determine decisions about, you know, your value when it comes to scholarship or what kind of athlete you are. but yeah, it's definitely a challenge. Luckily, it's a level playing field. Everybody is missing their season this year. It's not just some over the other. And so as much as that's not a nice thing to think about, it should give you some comfort in knowing that coaches are aware that the times you put up last year might not be a reflection of where you're at. Yeah, I would just stay focused and keep training as best as you can in the safest way possible, and try to get some video footage of what you can accomplish. There's also apps like Strava that can, continue to record your times. And I just, a blanket comment, lying about your academic or your athletic abilities in the recruitment process, or fibbing and fudging, there's just no reason to do it. At some point, people will feel the effects of kind of what I call the cost of a mishire. So if you're an athlete in a program you probably shouldn't be in, it's not going to be a fun place for you to be, and there's going to be problems for you and problems for the team. And so I think just, continue to be honest and upfront about what you can accomplish, and try to use the tools available to you to categorize what you are able to do during this, unprecedented time.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks, Alison. And one last update. We had a representative on the line today from Athletics Canada. James Cunningham has clarified the carding issue. So
thank you.
Athletics Canada carded athletes, they would not receive carding money for the months they're on scholarship and attending school. They would receive 4 months of carding during the summer months if they return to Canada. And James has also commented that all this info is on the Sports Canada and AC website, so you can find that information. But James, thanks for clarifying that. So
I appreciate that.
In summary, you get your carding during the months that you're not at school, as long as you return to Canada to train. All right, thank you, Alison. This has been really, really informative. I think very timely. And again, Streamline Athletes is on the AO website. Encourage you, if you've got any questions, to reach out to Alison and her team directly. They can answer any of your questions. We will also post this presentation on the website, which reminds me, Alison, make sure you send it to us. Thank you. And without further ado, thank you very much, Alison, and let everybody go.
Thank you all for being here. It's been a bit strange to chat only to myself and to Paul here, but I really appreciate you all listening, and looking forward to supporting you on a more individual level if you feel so inclined to reach out and get the process started.
All right. Thanks, Alison. Bye now.